What's one myth about sourdough that needs to go?
Oh, nice one. I wish we had more time for this, but I'll tell you one. One is that all people with celiac cannot consume sourdough bread. It is not true.
I do wish we could dive into that.
We have 8 customers that we know of, confirmed medically diagnosed celiac, that are absolutely fine on our bread. Now, we do have some people that are not fine on our bread. It's a spectrum like everything else, but we have 8 confirmed that are fine on our bread, including an 86-year-old woman that eats a slice of our bread every single day.
Amazing. Amazing.
Hey guys. So today's episode is sponsored by Baja Gold Co. It's one of my personal favorite salts. And Baja Gold is the world's most flavorful sea salt with naturally lower sodium and industry-leading macro and trace minerals to support daily performance. Welcome to Modern Ancestral Mamas. We are Corey and Christine, 2 millennial moms on a mission to bring ancestral wisdom to modern motherhood. And we are continuing our grain series today with today's guest. If you have not listened to the previous episodes, we recommend that you do, especially go back and listen to episode number 39, which is how to choose the best bread. And we also recommend listening to a very, very early episode number 9, because today's guest is a repeat offender. He's already been here before with us. And episode 9 was how to eat like a human with Bill and Christina Schindler. So if you want a little bit of background on today's guest, go back and listen to that one. Before we start, let's just take a second, pause real quick, give us a rating, 5-star rating if you wish. We would really appreciate it. Leave us a comment. We love comments. Comments help boost the algorithm. It helps other moms find the show. And it is a free and easy way to support Modern Ancestral Mamas. If you like watching things, we are on YouTube now. You can hit the little bell on YouTube, subscribe, and now you can see our faces. And our guest face today, who is... drum roll, please. Dr. Bill Schindler of the Modern Stone Age Kitchen. So, Dr. Bill, welcome to Modern Ancestral Mamas.
I am so happy to be here, and you're absolutely worth everything about a 5-star review. And as many mothers, I so wish you guys were doing this podcast when we had young kids. It would have meant a lot to us. It would have helped us a ton.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. That's so sweet. That's kind of why we felt like we needed to do this, because we wanted to have other moms be able to have a place to listen and get all of this information and feel like they're not alone in the trenches. So
yeah, and we wish we had something like this when we first started, because there was nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing like there's like blog posts, but beyond that. And it was like the fringe people at that point,
Right.
Okay.
So I think there were more than we think about, but they just weren't together,
Yeah. True.
Or didn't necessarily have the freedom or the voice to share what they were thinking or questioning too. So anyhow, thank you both for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. All right. So we always start our show with a little icebreaker question. So today we'll round table it. We'll just say you can go first, Bill. So our question today is sourdough starter, pet or science project?
Oh. My knee-jerk reaction is to say pet. And what I like to say literally is, we have 3 kids. They're not kids anymore. 21, 19, and 17 are their ages now. Brianna, Billy, and Alyssa. But I really like that we have trillions of babies, things that we're babysitting at home, right? I mean, we are literally babysitting trillions of wild bacteria and yeast. And that's my initial reaction when I think about sourdough mother in that question. So more like pet or child.
Okay, pet. Christine.
I say pet as well. It's one of those things. I've got 2 dogs and 3 children. I have to remember to feed the dogs. The kids feed the dog. I have to teach my kids how to feed the sourdough starter. Sometimes they forget and add other things in there because they're, little kids. And my goodness, one time my 8-year-old thought, one time she thought you had to add milk into the sourdough starter. And I was like, sweetheart, how many times have you fed this with just water and flour? So why she decided to add milk to it, I have no idea. Definitely a pet. Little Tamagotchi, it would have died at that point, but
Yeah, wait, what did happen?
I don't remember, honestly. I think a friend gave me another sourdough starter and I just started over again.
Well, let's touch on this later because we actually sometimes feed our mother on purpose with milk for certain things.
No way.
Yeah. But
Okay, wait.
let's touch on that later.
You have to answer, Corey.
I'll answer really quickly. A science project, because I can I'll let it sit in my refrigerator for far too long, and it gets all that hooch on it, and then I'm like, oh, so sorry, and restart it. Okay.
Wait, you started again over from scratch?
No.
Okay.
Like I dump off the hooch and scrape off whatever's gray, and then no, I haven't. I have had the same starter for 7 years at this point. And I've never fed it milk, which I'm really excited. We're going to talk about that in 2 seconds. But I have fed it the little yeasty strings from kombucha.
Oh,
very interesting.
whoa.
And that's actually how I started it, because I was having trouble. I tried to start one and it didn't work very well. And then the second time I started it, I used those little stringy yeasty bits from the kombucha, and it was like, it's been the very best starter. It's gone through so much. It's gone through moves. It's gone through, or a move. It's gone through babies being born and then it's being neglected. And
see, this is why it's a pet.
All that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Except it's a pet that you can put in the refrigerator and forget about for a couple of months.
Right.
Yes. And bring it back to life. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Milk. I want to know why would you
milk
intentionally?
Oh, all right. It may make, I'll do a little bit of a precursor to it now, but it may make more sense to dive deeper into it later. So I'm happy to bring it back up again.
Okay.
Once we go through a few things, but we can talk about it very quickly now.
Okay.
Actually, let's talk a little bit about definitions of a few things. So when I was baking at home regularly, I'd always end up with a little bit of, my fridge would get filled up with a ton of discard. So a whole, and I do later want to talk a lot about discard and discard recipes and what really is sourdough and when you use a discard to just make it, all those sorts of things in a little bit. But just for this definition wise to get started, I ended up with a ton of discard in the fridge, and it would build up, and I'd have different containers. Anybody listening to this that bakes at home sourdough knows exactly what I'm talking about. And then it gets a little bit confusing, and some has a hooch up. Well, it was a big deal at home, but when we started the sourdough bakery here, it became a much bigger deal because instead of refreshing 400 grams of sourdough mother a week, we're doing 30,000 grams a night here. I mean,
Right.
5-gallon buckets full of mother on a daily basis. So you can imagine it starts to build up. And if we're doing it every single day, how are we labeling things? And what we came up with here, even though it's on a larger scale than most people would do at home, I think is a very good guide for people at home as well. So the freshest sourdough mother that we have, we call the mother, right? So we refresh it 12 hours later, it's ready to go. That's our sourdough mother. The thing that we use to refresh it, any of that discard from the most recent discard batch, we call grandmother. So we have our mother and then we have our grandmother. And the reason we call it grandmother is because, and for any grandmothers out here, I mean this with the utmost respect, grandmothers are amazing. They fill a lot of important roles in our culture and our families, but compared to a mother, they're a little bit more tired, right? They don't necessarily have the pep and the energy that a mother would have. So there's a lot of use left in it. It can do a lot of things, but it can't necessarily both transform the health of, the safety and the health of the flour and also make the bread rise the way we want it to rise. So we call that grandmother. It's only grandmother for a day because once we make the new one, now we have another grandmother, right? So any thing that's been when we have a new grandmother, all the other grandmothers get put together in what we call a nursing home. And it's made up of a bunch of different grandmothers. And again, and I know this sounds very silly, but it does make a big difference because each one of these things are now labeled in a way that we can look at them and think about them and figure out what their best function and purpose is in our baking. So the nursing home has a whole bunch of grandmothers in it. and is older, obviously, than just the grandmother, and is definitely older than the mother. And what we do is the date that we put on the container is the date that it was refreshed. So that date follows through everything, right? So the date it was refreshed is on the mother, obviously, which should be the day before. The grandmother was obviously 2 days earlier than that. And then the nursing home has the date of the oldest grandmother in there when that was refreshed. So I can look at it right away and say, okay, it's got a bunch of grandmothers in it, but the oldest possible thing in here in this mixture is 7 days old. What am I going to do with it? Make that decision. So we have mother, grandmother, and nursing home. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, and this is why it's very important for the conversation around the milk in it, is the only, and this is sort of semantics, but some people looking at recipes might wonder what the difference is. There's a word in baking, especially in sourdough baking, called levain. And the levain is just nothing more than a sourdough mother for a specific purpose. And everything in that container is going to get used in the recipe. So for example, we have most of our breads use the same sourdough mother. We just call it bulk mother. So we mix up, say, 30,000 grams of mother. We have all this buckets of bubbling mother the next morning. But our sourdough bagels have a specific mother. And when we pull out all the regular mother we use for all the other breads, there's a little bit left, and that becomes the grandmother. But the mother that we've made up specifically for the 50 bagels that we're baking that day, that is a specific amount of mother. All of it gets used that day into whatever that recipe is. So that's what we call a levain. It's the only difference. It's a sourdough mother for a specific purpose. All of it is getting used. None of it's left over. So if that's the case, the reason I bring it up now is I have started messing around and playing around with using other things other than water for the sourdough mother. Now, I don't mess around with our bulk mother. I don't add milk one day and then water the next day and then milk the next day and beer. I don't do any of that because I just want my pristine mother all the time, made the same exact way every day or every week or whatever your baking schedule is. But sometimes we do offshoots, like and it depends on the recipe and the flavors and the textures that you're looking for. Milk has fat. It's going to make the crumb on the inside a little bit softer just because of that fat. Milk has sugars in it, which are going to help with some of the fermentation, especially on the yeast side. Milk has a particular flavor. It's not as bland as water, obviously. So when we make our sourdough waffles and pancakes here, there's no, other than, and if this is the case, do not tell me, other than making Bisquick pancakes or something, there's no recipe in the world, good recipe for pancakes that has water in it. That doesn't. Right. So I'm thinking when I was trying to develop our pancake and waffle recipes, I'm like, okay, there's water in the mother. Like, where do I hide the water? How do I hide? I'm like, wait, why don't I just use milk? Milk is in that anyhow. So we ferment when we refresh the mother to do that. We do that particular, or actually levain, because it's all getting used for that recipe. We do it with milk. We just finished St. Patrick's Day, right? St. Patrick's Day, we do an Irish soda bread, sourdough Irish soda bread. What do you think we mix the mother up with? We mix it with Guinness. We make the mother with Guinness, right?
Because what else would you use?
What's that?
Yeah. What else would you use?
Right? Yeah. When we make our apple cider donuts or sourdough apple cider donuts, we reduce apple cider and we make the mother with reduced apple cider instead of water.
Oh, this is great. So, like, if you were making some chocolate cake or something like that, could you use coffee, like a cold coffee?
Absolutely. The only thing you have to watch out for, and it's a little bit too technical for today, but sometimes fructose causes an issue.
Okay.
Especially with the yeast. So I wouldn't necessarily mix up a mother with fruit juice and expect the yeast to leaven the bread. But with the sourdough apple cider donuts, what I'm interested in with the sourdough process is breaking down the phytates and the lectins and making it healthier, dealing with the gluten. I'm not relying on the yeast in the donut to make it rise. So the fact that I've used that apple cider is fine because it's rising because of the baking soda or baking powder we're putting in it, right? But if you wanted to make a sourdough loaf and I don't know, you're celebrating the fall and you wanted to put apple cider in for the mother, it wouldn't make a really good loaf of sourdough bread, but it'd do fine for some of those other things.
Okay. So one more question on that vein. I've heard people say that using pineapple juice is really good for a sourdough starter. Have you heard of that or experimented with that?
I haven't messed with it, but with my experience of what I have messed with, I would disagree if they were using that sourdough mother as the sole way, the yeast
Of
in
leavening.
the mother to leaven it. But,
Okay.
actually, can I just say one very quick thing? Because I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, and I want to make sure everybody understands this. And I'm sure they do from the other, if they're this far down the sourdough path. But the beauty of sourdough, and the only things that I would consider sourdough are baked goods that use flour that rely on a simultaneous fermentation that's both a yeast fermentation and a bacterial fermentation. The yeast fermentation produces two things. The yeast eats the available sugars, and they create carbon dioxide and alcohol. Right. So if we're making beer, the alcohol is important, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But as far as the bread is concerned, it's very low level of alcohol, and it's not, it's negligible. It's the carbon dioxide that leavens the bread. So the yeast, the only thing the yeast does in the bread making process is make the bread rise and give the holes in the center and make it soft. That's the only thing that it does. The important part of sourdough is the bacterial fermentation. And the bacterial fermentation, the bacteria eat the available sugars and do a lot of things, tons of chemical and physical transformations. But one of the things that it does is it produces lactic acid, which is where you get the flavor, obviously, from the sourdough. But it's a very gentle, pleasant sour, right? It's the same kind of sour, same lactic sour you get in yogurt, the same lactic sour you would get in fermented vegetables and that sort of thing. It also drops the pH because it's producing the acid. And what's really, really, really important, and if anybody's listening to this, if there's one takeaway from this entire podcast, the most important thing that I think people do not understand in sourdough baking is that you have to ferment it down to a pH of at least 4.6, because when it hits 4.6, there's a protease enzyme, which means it's an enzyme that works on proteins. And this particular enzyme or enzymes work on gluten, the protein in the flour, and it starts to chop it up and transform it. So for people that are gluten-sensitive, celiac, gluten intolerant, that's incredibly important. And if it doesn't reach a pH of 4.6, that enzyme doesn't get activated and the gluten isn't transformed at all. So again, there's a ton of other chemical and physical processes that are happening throughout that fermentation process. But the thing that makes sourdough, the thing that makes sourdough healthy, the thing that most people listening to this podcast trying to nourish their families and feed their kids the healthiest bread possible, the thing that you're looking for is to make sure that the bacteria have been present through the fermentation and have actually had the time and have been in the environment to do the work that it's supposed to do. If it hasn't, do not consider it sourdough. And unfortunately, there is no requirement in this country for any sort of baked good to meat to call it sourdough. So just by looking at the name in the grocery store, which we'll talk about later, isn't enough. So anyhow, as far as this conversation is concerned, the other things that bacteria do is the bacteria are responsible for transforming the flavor. Bacteria are responsible for transforming the aroma. I mean, all the wonderful things from the health perspectives, the nutritional perspectives, and the pleasure in the eating aspect of the bread all comes from the bacteria. That bacterial fermentation has to take place there. Now, there's a lot of sourdough bakers that also, there's a lot of people that make bread they call sourdough that do some shortcuts and some tricks that make it so that it's not sourdough. A lot of sourdough bakers also add a little bit of yeast, commercial yeast, a pinch of it in. We don't here, but I would say if it is something that, unless you have an intolerance or you wouldn't have an allergy to it, but I know some people that cannot consume. They have all sorts of adverse effects if they consume commercial yeast. So they can't eat that, but many of them can have sourdough. Unless you fall into that category, the fact that they've put commercial yeast in doesn't necessarily negate it as a sourdough. If they're introducing the sourdough mother and the bacteria is alive and well and still doing its job, and they've added a pinch of commercial yeast to ensure that they get the lift they're looking for, in many cases, I would still consider it sourdough, if that makes sense.
Oh my gosh, this is making me so excited to dive down into all of these other questions. But just for the listeners that are probably new and not sure who you are or what it is that you do, you can go back, like I said, and listen to episode number 9. And that will give you a background on what Bill Schindler does. But I do want to pause for a second Bill and his wife, Christina, they have a restaurant in Chesterton, Maryland, right?
Yep, Chestertown, yep.
Chestertown, Maryland. And it's called Modern Stone Age Kitchen. And I would venture to say, Corey, I can't remember if you've been or not yet.
Yep.
Yeah, you've been. Yeah, we've both been. It's probably the only restaurant in the U.S. that is literally doing absolutely everything right. So definitely go if you can. So real quick, can you just give us an update on how Modern Stone Age Kitchen is doing? Is there anything new that you guys are doing with it? Tell us a little bit about the restaurant.
It's so funny because I was thinking about this when we started the podcast, and you guys were saying we were all talking about how there wasn't something like this available, and you guys just created it because there was a need for it, right? It's the same thing here. Christina and I and our family and our team here started this restaurant because we were just looking for a restaurant that we could bring our family to and be okay with. Literally, can we sit down and the kids can order anything on the menu and we'd be like, okay, we're good with this. Not feel guilty, not come home and feel sick, not lose dinner, whatever. And that's exactly, we didn't do it on purpose, but that's exactly what we've built. So because of that need. And now all of our meals come out of here too, which is kind of a plus as well, that we eat with. But the idea is this: we did sit down at the beginning of creating this business, this restaurant, and we wrote down a list of things we would always do and we would never do. And I'm sure we talked about this on the earlier episode. But things like applicable to this, any flours would be put through 100% wild, long, slow fermentation process. Any grains, nuts, seeds, or legumes are soaked, sprouted, nixtamalized, and/or fermented. There were no industrial nut or seed oils. We were industrial nut and seed oil free before it was cool. We would make everything 100% from scratch, and that means literally everything. We bring in 100 to 120 gallons of milk a week. We make all of our cheese, all of our cream cheese, all of our butter. We nose to tail butcher in-house. We ferment our vegetables. All of the things that I thought were incredibly important to nourishing my family, we've implemented here. But what I'm really, really proud of too, and this just sort of organically grew this way, is if I eat a very, very, it's so funny I'm talking about bread today. I eat a very incredibly low carb diet. I rarely eat bread. When I do, it's sourdough. I am very animal-based, lots of offal, lots of animal fats. I don't even eat a whole ton of vegetables. I do eat vegetables, but not a ton of them. And if, I had this mindset, like, this is how I want my family to eat all the time, and this is how I'm going to build a restaurant. And if we did, we wouldn't be here today because there's probably 3 people in the county that eat exactly the way that I do, and we would have no customers. But what we ended up doing, and I think this is even more powerful, is we have landed here. We're trying to make familiar food as nourishing as it could possibly be. So you can come in here and get pancakes and waffles and croissants and ham and cheese sandwich and soup and pizza and tacos or whatever it is. And all of it is made entirely from scratch, and all of it is made using all the principles that and some other ones as well that I mentioned earlier. And as far as where we're going now, we're in another farmer's market now. We're on the verge of expanding production. We currently have, well, as you can imagine, making this food entirely from scratch requires a massive amount of labor. But it's one of the things we're really proud of, because we currently have, I think, 27 people on our team.
Whoa.
Wow.
That's a lot.
That's huge for a restaurant.
She does all the payroll. She's the one who's the one that's stressing out all the time with it. It requires that much work if we're making it all from scratch. And what we found is, if you look at a typical restaurant, the labor costs and food costs are exactly the opposite of ours. They have really high food costs and lower labor costs compared to the food costs, because most of the food they're bringing in, the value add has happened somewhere else. So they're paying other companies, other people to produce the food and have no sort of control over what's happening. But what we're doing is we're bringing in raw ingredients in all cases, and all the value add happens in here, which means we get to put our money into our neighbors and our community and the people that literally live around the corner. And the work that they're doing isn't opening up a package and putting it in a microwave. Like, they're literally transforming milk into cheese and nixtamalizing maize, and they just stone ground it a little bit ago, and they're making tortillas right now, and they're going through the entire sourdough process. So they're invested in what they're making, and they're making really real incredible food. So our labor and food costs have flipped from a typical restaurant, but together combined, they're almost the same, which is, I think, a really interesting model for other places. You can put, the customer comes in here and spends money, and that money, most of that money goes directly to their neighbors and their community, and the rest of it goes to the farmers and the ranchers and whatever around, and dairy farmers and whatever, right in the same area. I mean, it's a beautiful system, and I don't understand why it wasn't something we would have realized in the beginning. We thought we were going to go bankrupt, and maybe we still will one day. I don't know, but it's working right now, and it's wonderful to come to work. The vibe in here is awesome. Everybody's happy, and just community, the people. We have an incredible team. In fact, Christine and I were just in Ireland for 10 days. Not only are they making all of this food entirely from scratch, but they're good. Like, really, this team is really good, and very few of them have even come from the restaurant world. Most of them have taken a class here and then decided they wanted to work here. And, we trained them on the spot. So we were able to get away for 10 days. Now, we were doing work in Ireland, but we were away from this place for 10 days, came back 2 nights ago, sat down with our general manager yesterday, and we're waiting for, okay, what went wrong? And nothing. Like, they did an amazing job. It's fantastic.
Wow. Oh
Wow.
my gosh.
I would venture to guess that most restaurateurs are not having that experience.
Yeah.
No, and it's another thing that we hear a lot is everybody says, "Can you find anybody good?" Like, we can't find anybody good. We can't keep people, and it's not, knock on wood, it's not a problem that we're having. I mean, we've had actually several people just relocate to work here. They actually picked up and moved. 2 people already just did in the past month, and we just got a message this past week that they want to move and work as well. It's wonderful. It's so invigorating to be around these people who are care about what they do and are doing a great job.
What's amazing too is if you've never been to Chestertown, like, it is a small town with not a lot around it. I mean, it's like semi-close to DC, but not semi-close enough for you to just like go for lunch in the middle of a work day. Like, this is a really small town. So I'm so heartened by what you guys are doing, and it like gives me hope for these sorts of businesses and restaurants and stuff to be popping up other places. I'm so inspired by you guys. It's just like,
well, thank you so much.
I'm gushing.
Couple other things that are happening right now that I think are really exciting and potentially exciting for people in your community listening to this. Number one, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Christina and I have literally just started our own podcast, and we would love the both of you to be on it. So I hope.
Oh my
hope
gosh!
You accept.
Whoa!
So we have
Absolutely, we would be
our whole
honored.
studio set up. We're ready to go. So we'll talk after this. So I take that as a yes.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
We just redid. We have a nonprofit here, and we do just continue to do a lot of research through the nonprofit and a lot of teaching, a lot of classes. We're working on expanding our classroom because it's not accessible the way that it is, and I want everybody to have individual workstations and be able to crush a whole bunch of amazing classes. So we're working on certainly expanding that. We with that though, with the launch of our new website and the consolidation of a lot of the different things that we're doing, we are about to launch a community where people can ask questions about sourdough. We'll be on all the time talking about things. There'll be recipes and classes and a community of people throwing back and forth questions about how to make real food in their homes. So that's coming up very soon. We are every year we take a group to Ireland. It is, I don't know if you saw the video we did the other day. It is a food, culture, history, prehistory tour of Ireland like you've never seen. It's a week. We do it at the end of July every year. So that we just posted information on that. It is literally a transformative experience. It is a great way to not only see what Ireland truly really is and has been for a very long time from the food world, but it's a great way to reflect on things we can do even in our own country, in our own homes, and eating amazing food the entire time. And this is kind of crazy, and I don't know where you both stand on this, but I'm always getting humbled and when we have a lot of feedback from customers and I try to reimagine what's the proper way to do things in the world we live in, and going along those same lines as that I mentioned earlier, trying to make familiar food as nourishing as it can possibly be. We're making food here that, well, as nourishing as it possibly be. One of the questions that we have, though, and I didn't know how to approach it, was what about alcohol? Like, what do you do with alcohol? Like, we'll talk a little bit about food. We'll talk a little bit about whether or not we should be eating bread or not later, I'm sure, but or the place in our diet. But does alcohol have a place in our diet? And if it does, and it does in a lot of people's worlds, one of the roles that I think we should fill here is, how do we make it as nourishing as it can possibly be? How do we create an environment where the alcohol consumption is not us sitting there obviously doing shots at the bar, but if you're somebody who drinks a glass of wine with dinner, what kind of wine would we serve? If you're going to have beer, what kind of beer should we serve? If you're going to have a mixed drink, what kind of mixed drink should we serve? I mean, you would talk to, if you listen to a lot of the influencers that are out there right now, and a lot of the biohackers, they're suggesting, and I understand why they're saying it, that potentially hard alcohol is a better choice than certain beers and wines because it's cleaner and all these other things. Well,
good.
This is what we
I
landed
much
on.
prefer hard alcohol.
You do?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Gin is gin's my go-to.
Same. I love gin. Won't drink wine. Definitely won't drink beer.
Yeah.
But why? Because it's related to the bread.
Wait,
I just don't like it.
Why? Oh, because you don't like it?
Wine I'm okay with. Like I like it. If I'm served wine at a party or somebody's house, I'd be happy to have a glass. Beer, I just really don't like. Like I really don't like it.
Okay.
Yeah. I feel that way about beer. I think it's gross.
Yeah, I do too. My husband though loves beer.
Same. Loves beer, specifically IPAs.
Yes, Ryan too. And I would prefer a gin and tonic.
All right, so this is what we landed on. So first off, we were in.
I know, I'm like on the edge of my seat. Okay.
We were in the Republic of Georgia last year doing research, cheese research. But Republic of Georgia has the claims, and it's true. Archaeologically, it holds up. They have the oldest wine in the world and the oldest honey in the world. They claim they have the oldest cheese in the world. Right now, that award goes to Poland at the moment. But regardless, they have a very strong and old cheese tradition, which is why we're there learning to make a couple of these traditional cheeses. But I knew about their deep wine prehistory. I mean, they have wine that dates back they started making wine over 8,000 years ago. So we made it a point to go to several of these small vineyards over at Georgia, and we were at this one particular one, and it was amazing. And I remember, first off, they ferment their wine in these clay corvies in the ground. Like they sink the fermentation vessel, which is actually still a clay vessel, even on a commercial level, in the ground. So if you walked into a winery in the U.S. here, or even in France or somewhere, you see these big, huge steel tanks, right? Mm-hmm. But you walk in there, and it's a big open room, and you look down, and it's a bunch of things that look like manhole covers, but they're actually the tops of all the wine's getting done in the ground. Anyhow, we're walking around. The woman it was her family's winery, was wonderful, and she's walking us around. But we went to this one room, and there was a poster on the wall, and it had three drawings of wine bottles. And it was all in Georgian. I couldn't read it, but the first one had a whole bunch of words. The second one had less words, but still a whole bunch. And the third one had hardly any words in it. And I said, "What is this?" She says, "Oh, this is the wine that you have access to in America. This is representing it." I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well," and this holds up because I checked into it after we got back. You were allowed in this country to sell. It doesn't matter if it was a $500 bottle of wine or a $7 bottle of wine. 96 additives that do not have to be on the label. Mm-hmm. 96 additives. Even organic wine can have 40 something on it. She says, "This is the regenerative wine that we make here in Georgia. We use ancestral grapes. We spontaneously ferment. We don't add any yeast at all. They don't use any sulfites to kill off the wild yeast first. They just literally spontaneously ferment it. They ferment it in these clay corvies in the ground. It's unfiltered. And then at the end, before they bottle it, just like almost every winemaker does, in many cases, they put a tiny bit of sulfite so the bottles don't explode, but it's at the minimal place at the end." And I'm not proud of this. I am not proud of this. We drank enough wine to kill a large sailor. It was unbelievable. Every morning we woke up, we could have run a marathon. When we say the word wine, it means different things depending on how it's made and where you're getting it. So we committed. The only wine, we import wine directly from Georgia that meets all those. So it's regenerative farm, regenerative made, meets all those criteria. So as far as wine's concerned, that's where we stand on wine. As far as beer is concerned, we actually only serve sour beers. All beer until the mid 1800s was a sour beer, just like sourdough bread. All bread was sourdough bread until the mid 1800s. So what happens is if you think about, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit, the health benefits of the sourdough process, as far as the grain's concerned with bread, the same sort of thing happens with beer. So if you're going to consume beer, at least as far as I'm concerned, it should be a sour beer. Not only is that historically a little bit more appropriate, but it conveys a lot of the same health benefits of the sourdough process with the bread. But as far as the hard alcohol is concerned, and this is the part I'm really excited about, I agree that, the hard alcohol itself can be some of the cleanest versions of any alcohol that's out there. The problem comes with the mixers. Like almost any cocktail you buy is loaded with sugar, but artificial colors, artificial preservatives, all artificial flavorings, all these nasty things, all the orange flavored this and whatever. So when you start mixing drinks, you cannot go out other than potentially a martini. You cannot go out anywhere, order a mixed drink, and expect to not have a bunch of, at minimum, nasty sugar in your drinks.
Yeah.
So we applied the same sort of approach that we take to food here to the alcohol, and I'm so excited. So we teamed up with a local distiller in Maryland that only makes completely organic alcohols from local grains from local farmers, and that's our base alcohol. The only thing we're bringing in is the base alcohol from them. We're making everything else. So we're making all the mixers, we're making all the vermouths, we're making Campari, we're making Aperol, we're making all the bitters, we're making all of the pieces, and we're even we brought in a bunch of raw olives from California, and we cured those for the martinis, and we're all of it. So you can come in here and get a mixed drink, but it is, again, a completely different thing than getting a mixed drink somewhere else. It's the healthiest version of it.
I am seriously mind blown. What? This is crazy. Also, martinis, for the record, if I am going to drink alcohol, are my preferred drink. And I think you said something about we drank a whole bunch of wine in Georgia and we felt like we could run a marathon the next day. This is one of the reasons why I don't drink anymore, is because it didn't matter what I drank here in the US. It made me feel like bleep. Okay. I did not feel good. And so I was just like, well, I guess I'm just not going to drink. And so I'm really curious, how did the wine taste?
Oh.
And it sounds like it didn't affect you guys. It sounds like it was maybe like drinking a kombucha or something, or maybe something with water kefir.
So let me preface this by saying, this is not to suggest we need alcohol in order to be healthy.
Yeah.
But we are complex beings. Being nourished as a human means more than just meeting our nutritional requirements and keeping out things that we nutritionally maybe shouldn't have. We're complex. We need to meet our cultural needs and our emotional needs and our religious needs and our political needs, and whatever needs we have, whatever they happen to be, they all have to be met simultaneously to be fully nourished. And that's a complex equation, and it's different for every single person. So for some people, alcohol is a part of their life. For some people, it's every single day. For some people, it's only on special occasions. But if alcohol isn't a part of your life and you can meet all those needs without it, awesome. I mean, that's the gold standard, and that's fantastic. But if alcohol is a part of your life, if you can at least consume the most nourishing versions of them, and I mean that in every way, from safety to actually conveying nourishment, because the reality is the production of alcohol, in almost every case, takes something that is a package of nutrition that in the raw state is inaccessible to our bodies and could actually make us very sick if we consumed a lot of it in the raw state. I mean, a handful of barley, if you took a handful of raw barley and ate it, you would actually, at minimum, your belly would hurt. You would get no nutritional requirements. The phytates and the lectins, which they act as anti-nutrients, would suck nutrition away. You would get no nutritional value from it and actually could get sick. But if you transform that into beer, we now have, I'm not suggesting we drink beer to get nourished, but it is a way to unlock nutrients from the barley and make them accessible to us. And certainly we can overdo it, right? If we drink too much of it, that would make us sick as well. But it is a way to actually get nutrition at some level. But there is that social piece, that emotional piece that sometimes can be beneficial to people. And the problem is we have all these conversations, just like with anything in our food system, whether it's bread, like the conversation today, or alcohol. We have these superficial conversations and this clickbait coming out from social media influencers. Oh, you can't drink alcohol; it's poison. It's going to do that. What are we talking about? If we're talking about the wine this completely regenerative, and the Republic of Georgia is not the only place that's producing this, but from what I understand, it is the place where there's the largest concentration of people doing it right. I mean, you can find some amazing winemakers in this country and in France and a bunch of other places doing similar sorts of things, but they've been doing it for a very long time, and most of them are doing it like this. That wine, a glass of that wine, or even 2 glasses of that wine at night, is a completely different experience nutritionally for our bodies, and from a safety perspective, than just about any other wine we'd get at the store, even if we spent $75 on the bottle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Man, I have some questions for you about that, but I think we'll just do it. We'll do that off air because I have some.
Yeah, but I'm so excited to launch our bar program. And finally, last piece, we are launching. So we don't do most dinners. We do Friday night dinners. We do pizzas and things, but most dinners we don't. So we have this period of time between, like, say, 2:00, and most people aren't eating lunch, getting lunch anymore, and like 4 and we close. That we're trying to figure out what we're going to do for people. So we are doing a whole bunch of beautiful cured meats and cheeses that we're making. So we're doing charcuterie boards. You can come and get a vermouth and have some charcuterie from local animals that we've made. So there's a lot of fun things happening.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay. So part of the reason that we wanted to have you on particularly is that you just like super geek out about about all of the bread stuff and the grains and the sourdough and all that. Obviously, if you hadn't, if the listeners hadn't caught on yet, we're gonna just totally geek out about all the things.
Okay.
So let's go down a little history rabbit trail here. What is the history of humans and grains? When did humans start eating grains, in our timeline? Yeah, let's start with that.
Okay.
That's probably a bigger question than it sounds like it is.
No, but it actually, yes and no. Part of the issue is, and even from an archaeological perspective, it's very hard to see things as fragile as plant parts in the archaeological record, unless they've been preserved in a certain way. Like if they've been carbonized, for example, they can last for a long time, and they can still keep their sort of morphological characteristics that distinguish not only that it's a plant part, but what plant it came from. But in general, things don't last a heck of a long time. So we don't know exactly when grains made it into our diets, but I am of the mindset that we've always had plants. In fact, we've had plants in our diets before we started eating animals. I am a very animal-based in my own diet. I am of that mindset that the most important introduction of anything in our diets prehistorically were animals when we started hunting, and it made literally all the difference. But we were eating plants before that and throughout the entire process. So people that are suggesting that it is ancestrally appropriate to not have any plants in their diets, I disagree with. We've always had plants in our diets. Now, we've had them at different levels. The plants themselves were different than what we get at the grocery store today on a number of different levels. But grains, certainly we did. What we have to remember is that so many things about the way we deal with food today mask the reality of the labor required and the time required to truly deal with these things the way we dealt with them in the past. Like harvesting wild grains is incredibly labor intensive. Cleaning those grains is incredibly labor intensive. Preparing them, grinding them, doing all of those things that we would be doing that now is done by machines or by machines really. And the price of them are masked by things like government subsidies that are, focused on things like grains. We can't even look at price and have that be a correlate to how difficult it is to deal with these things. So they were at very low levels in our diets, especially before the agricultural revolution. But we have found them. In fact, I do think the earliest probably consumption of grains in our diets, and this is going to bear with me for a second, this is going to sound very disgusting, but There's two ways. There's two ways that we get nutrition from the outside world as humans, because we have incredibly inefficient digestive tracts. One way is to allow an animal that is perfectly designed to consume whatever their natural diet is, consume these things, transform them into blood and fat and organs and milk and all this, and then we consume that after it's been transformed into something that's very, easily and safely digestible by humans, or we replicate those biological processes that happen inside of those animals and do them ourselves before we eat them, whether we're fermenting grains or whatever it happens to be. But if you think about what happens when an animal consumes something like a grain, or if a cow is consuming grass, or a reindeer is consuming lichen, by the time that they've taken it, broken it down, transformed it, turned it into muscle or fat or blood or whatever it is, there's a loss there because of going through the process. There's a loss in whatever the ultimate amount of energy and nutrition that's in that by the time it makes it to that. So if that's the case, the very best, I'm going to go down, it's going to be on my gravestone, but the very most nutrient-dense, bioavailable food on the planet is chyme.
Oh no!
Oh.
What is it? Oh no!
Chyme is
I don't know.
First of all, I didn't know that's how you pronounced it.
yes.
Oh, spell it then.
Chyme,
Spell it.
Chyme.
Yes.
It is the stomach and small intestine contents of
Oh,
animals.
okay. I thought you were going to say excrement. So
Oh, no. I mean, that's a
better
thing,
than
too,
what I
for
was
certain animals.
expecting.
So they found Neanderthals where they look in the kind of the dental calculus of things that are left on their teeth, and they look at the microfossils of the plants, and they're like, wow, there's no reason they should be eating some of these plants. Like, there's no possible way humans can get nutrition from these plants, and what are they doing? And what they found, the best interpretation, and they looked, and this still happens around the world, but definitely we have a ton of historical documentation of this happening, is they were eating the stomach contents of the reindeer, and then it is digested and detoxified, but it hasn't, the nutrients haven't been absorbed through the body at that point, so we get them. So anyhow, that's all that is to say is I'm confident that our ancestors were having access to wild seeds and grains through at least that in the early stages. The earliest interpretation of anything that is interpreted as being related to bread dates to about 14,000 years ago. This is from Jordan, and if it is a bread, it's more like a flatbread-like thing. It's more like bread crummy-like things that were found, so it may or may not be bread, but it definitely was made from a combination of wild grains and consumed in some way. The oldest thing that we can confidently say is bread dates to about 8,600 years ago and was found in Turkey at a famous site called Katahoyuk, which is, this is an intensively excavated site. Tons of things have been recovered there and interpreted there. This was actually bread that was leavened. We know for sure it was sourdough, which is cool. So let's go with that date for a minute. 8,600 years ago is potential. At least was how long ago people were making bread. All of the bread what's that? Can
you give us just a tiny bit of historical context? What is happening at that time? Like, how long ago is this? Like, in my brain, that's a number. What is happening at this time in history?
What's happening in Turkey at that time?
This is a great question. So,
or just
real
like
quick,
in the world, it doesn't have to just be Turkey. Like, just like,
yeah.
Are we talking like Byzantine Empire? Like, what's the?
We have just as far as sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Not inventions, but technologies from the time period. Because again, if we're looking at a worldwide scale, things are happening at different time periods in different places. Yeah. There's a lot of diversity. But 3.5 million years ago, we have our first stone tools. 2 million years ago, we have our first fire and hunting technology. Depending on where you are in the world, 10 to 15,000 years ago, we start seeing the introduction of agriculture. So this is squarely within after the development of agriculture that we start finding this. So in this particular part of the world, there's a lot of concentration of it isn't hunter-gatherers running around. This is concentration. These are small cities, that sort of thing.
This is what we're calling civilization, right?
You said,
civilization.
Yeah. So
Right.
hunter-gatherer lifestyle, though, I think that's
No,
or-
it wouldn't be hunter-gatherer lifestyle.
it would not be. Okay.
It would be farmers. Now, there are hunter-gatherers in different part of the world at this time,
Right.
certainly. Actually, there still are today, obviously. But in this particular, pocket in the world, it would be, again, I don't know about civilization as we would think about, small city-state sort of thing. And they would absolutely be farmers. And they would absolutely be trying to feed larger concentrations of people, and are able to do that because they're focused on annual grasses like grains. Not necessarily because it's more nutritious, they absolutely are not, but because there's a lot of calories, and you can concentrate fields and monocrop and be able to produce a lot of calories, not nutrition, but a lot of calories out of the field and support these people. So about 8,600 years ago. From 8,600 years ago or so, up until the mid-1800s, every single loaf of bread baked anywhere in the world was sourdough. And when I say sourdough, it had a combination of bacteria and yeast fermentations. The yeast is making it rise, and the bacteria is literally transforming it into what its final product is, which is different than most bread anybody in the world is eating today. Mm-hmm. What you mentioned, too, the mother, you sort of got started with the kombucha SCOBY strains. Mm-hmm. It also made me think of this as well. Because of how the way we perceive the world is partially, in many ways, dictated or at least influenced by what we see. Like the way we shop, what we see at a grocery store influences the way we view the world and the way if you diet and all these things. It is a very carbohydrate heavy thing, ultra processed food in the grocery store. But one thing that's very interesting in the grocery store is it is almost completely absent of bacteria, at least good bacteria. And we see yeast in packets. So, we see yeast, the Fleischmann's yeast in a packet or whatever. And to me, growing up, and until very recently, past several decades, to me that's recently, there's yeast. There's yeast. The yeast comes in a packet. Yeast comes in a packet. Well, the reality is bacteria and yeast live together in nature all the time. And that's the natural state of yeast is to be sitting there right next to a bunch of bacteria. So we say, a SCOBY is a thing for, a SCOBY is not, I don't want to say it's a weird thing, but in the context of modern food, a SCOBY is a weird thing, a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. A sourdough mother is a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. Kefir is a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. The natural state for yeast and bacteria is to be together, and those fermentations should be happening side by side. And they always have been until Louis Pasteur started taking strains of yeast aside and keeping them going in a factory. So what's been happening over the past 150 years or so is a very strange new thing in our diets. Very, very strange and new. And we're feeling the effects of it right now. But the natural state should be bacteria and yeast living together and working together on foods to transform them into stuff that we can eat.
Mm-hmm. Oh, man, I love how you just broke that down. That is... Yes. I have to ask this question because my husband really wanted me to ask you this, but what came first, beer or bread? I
know it sounds like some college question that, a bunch of frat boys should be asking this. It's actually a really good question, and it's been plaguing anthropology for decades. We don't know the answer. Most anthropologists at this point, including me, would agree that it was beer.
Okay.
I mean, and think about it. Nobody forget the combine and the harvester and the huge mills that we have at King Arthur and all that. The reality of what it takes to clear a field, prepare a field, plant the field, protect the field, harvest the field, protect those grains, process those grains, and bake a loaf of bread. That time investment is massive. In fact, I would suggest there was nothing so intense, labor intensive, and just intense in general in our food system as that prior to it. I mean, it was a huge transformation to invest that much time into creating grains. Nobody does that for food, especially when they were eating amazing diets before that, better diets before that. But everybody will do that, work that hard for alcohol. Like everybody will, right? I'm seriously, everybody does. And so whether it's transforming corn into chicha, or transforming barley into beer, or rice into sake, those probably came first, and then the food piece came after. And it's so hard for us to think about that because there's such a stigma around alcohol. And again, I'm not suggesting consuming alcohol is nutritionally a healthy thing, but the reality is we're humans. And real quick, this is important. This is so important. There is a great, I have it right here. Let me get this book. Wait, hold on.
Okay.
I love how passionate. I love the passion.
I know.
I love it.
Me too.
If figuring out what to feed your family feels exactly like a never-ending to-do list, I get it. That is exactly why I created these 3 cookbooks just for you. 1 Chicken, 5 Meals shows you how to stretch a single bird into a week of nourishing, no-stress dinners. Nourishing Junk Food lets you create your favorites with using real food ingredients, no food dyes, no seed oils, and no other junk, just the flavors that you love. And in betweens, that's the secret weapon for snack time, lunch boxes, and all those what do I even feed them right now moments. All 3 are kid-friendly, mama approved, and made for real life. Get your copies today and turn your kitchen into a place that you actually enjoy. Go to fornutrientsake.com and use the code MAM15 for 15% off your order.
Hey mamas, do you want to add a new secret ingredient to your kitchen? Are you ready for this? Give Baja Gold sea salt a try today. We know our food is lacking minerals because of the depleted soil, so increase your mineral content of your food by using Baja Gold sea salt.
Baja Gold is an all-natural, unrefined sea salt from the Sea of Cortez. This salt is made the way it used to be, sun-dried with all of the ocean's minerals intact. No processing, no chemical flowing agents, nothing but pure, unrefined mineral salt.
And because of how and where they make their salt, Baja Gold is naturally lower in sodium and higher in minerals like magnesium and potassium. Moms, did you know that magnesium is a mineral used in over 300 bodily processes? Yeah, I know. We all know it is helpful for relaxing little bodies before bedtime.
Give Baja Gold a try today. Visit BajaGoldSaltCo.com to learn more. Check the show notes for the link and use the code MAM10 for 10% off.
That is MAM10 for 10% off. Okay, what is this book we're putting in our show notes?
This is called The Drunken Monkey. The Drunken Monkey, Why We Drink and Abuse Alcohol, by an anthropologist called Robert Dudley. He's an anthropologist at University of California, Berkeley. And it's a great book. I'm just about finished with it. But he came up with, I think it was in the 90s, a hypothesis called the Drunken Monkey hypothesis. And what he's suggesting in this hypothesis is that all mammals are naturally driven to alcohol, to consume alcohol. Now, you think, where does a monkey get alcohol? Well, there's a lot of places in nature to get alcohol. Any fruit that falls will spontaneously ferment from the wild yeast when the sugars are exposed and turn alcoholic. And if you want to do something funny, literally get off of the TikTok and get on YouTube and just start Googling and typing in and searching for drunken monkey or animals that are drunk. I mean, you think a giraffe looks funny on its own. A drunk giraffe is one of the most hilarious things possible. But it makes a lot of sense for at least what his hypothesis is, because this is what he's suggesting. First off, we know that the only part of a plant that is designed for another creature to eat is the fruit. That's it. Every other part of the plant is part of the plant. I mean, it's there. The role of that is to, engage in photosynthesis or, hybridize, pollinate, do all the things it's supposed to do, and then produce a seed, right? But so if we're interrupting a piece of that and we're actually interrupting a part of the natural process of that plant, right? But so it protects itself through these, through chemical warfare. But the fruit is the only part. No, the flower is typically non-toxic and beautiful, and it smells good because it's trying to attract as well. But the fruit is there for the sole purpose of attracting another animal to eat it when the seeds are mature, so that it can take those seeds and deposit those seeds in a pile of manure somewhere in the plant. I mean, it's a beautiful system, but that only counts for when the seeds are mature. It doesn't work when the seeds are not mature. So most fruits have a toxic level to them before the seeds are mature. They want to keep animals away before the seeds are ready to get spread. And then when the seeds are mature, that toxin turns off and the animal's able to consume it more safely. But there's two really big takeaways from that. Number one, his suggestion in the Drunken Monkey hypothesis is that one way to ensure that there's no toxins left in that fruit and it's metabolically the most nutritionally available to our bodies is if it started to ferment. Because it will not ferment until all the sugars are completely ready and the sugars are exposed. And so his suggestion is it's literally an evolutionary mechanism to make sure that we're not consuming any of the toxins in the fruit, which I think is pretty interesting. And which also is the same thing for barley and rye and all those other things. Those things on their own, and it's part of the sourdough process as well, is they are on their own very, very toxic. Phytates, lectins, all these things. But by the time it's turned to alcohol, not all, but a lot of the safety issues with it are gone. But the other sort of takeaway with this is the seeds, nuts, grains, and legumes produced by plants are the babies of the plant. Mm-hmm. They are, in my mind, the most heavily guarded things because they're trying to protect their babies. Just like we'll protect our babies, however we do as humans, they protect it through chemical warfare. So the seeds, nuts, grains, and legumes are designed to stay dormant until they're in the right environment to produce new life and sprout. It doesn't do a seed, a grain, a nut, or a legume any sort of good. In fact, it's a death sentence for them to sprout unless they're in that environment. If I put it on the table and it sprouts, it's going to die. Like it's not. But if it stays dormant, and it stays dormant partially because of all the toxins that are, especially on the outside of that protect it until it's ready, until it's put in that right environment. But here we are. I mean, I know we love bread. I know it smells good. I know that it tastes good. I know that it's comforting to eat. But the reality is the fact that we're eating these things that plants produce that are chemically and physically designed to withstand our digestive tract. And here we are trying to safely derive nutrition from them is a very, very weird thing, right? I mean, a watermelon seed, for example, looks like a bullet because it's designed to shoot right through the digestive tract of an animal and come out the other end. I mean, it's true. And most seeds, especially wild seeds, require something called scarification for them to be able to sprout. Scarification is what happens to it chemically and physically when it goes through the digestive tract of an animal. And many of them require going through the digestive tract of an animal to even be able to sprout once they come out the other end. And here we are trying to eat it. It's very, very strange. So the point of this is eating a grain is a dangerous thing. Eating a grain that we use some sort of an ancestral or traditional way to detoxify and release the nutrients in it is a completely different animal, and that's where something like sourdough comes in.
I have to pause and say a really funny story related to this because you talked about how, the plants, all plants have toxins except for the fruit, okay? So if you want to be in a very uncomfortable situation, then make sure you have your 8-year-old announce to everybody at a family dinner party that vegetables have poison in them.
Oh my God.
And then you will hear a pin drop but mom says vegetables have poison in them. And I'm just like, oh God. Now I have to explain the context, and here I am trying to backtrack and explain to the dinner party what I mean by vegetables have poison in them, when of course everybody knows vegetables are the most healthy food in the world. So, oh man, that was uncomfortable.
Did you get out of it?
For me? I mean, I felt like I kind of did, but I definitely thought I was backpedaling and struggling to climb out of that one.
I mean, that's kind of when you just have to own your super weirdness and be like, listen, Mom, I'm the one that has weird food ideas, okay? Y'all do whatever you want to do. It's okay.
We were eating breakfast on St. Patrick's Day in a little cafe called Little Acorn in a place called Baltinglass in the Wicklow Mountains in Ireland this past Monday. And somebody sitting at the table in his 60s, we were talking about potatoes. And I was trying to convey, on St. Patrick's Day in Ireland how dangerous potatoes actually are, especially potato skins, and it didn't go over very well. But yeah, I feel your pain. I did that one to myself though. At least you had some help.
I know, right?
At least you could hide behind your 8-year-old.
I know. Yeah.
Okay, so we're doing an entire series on bread, right? I think we told you that.
Yeah, grains.
On bread and grains, and we have had some people on to talk about how bread should only be made with freshly milled grains, and if these grains are freshly milled and organic, that they then don't have to be put through a soaking, souring, sprouting process.
Fermentation process, yes.
Fermentation or changing sort of process to make them more digestible. So from what I have researched into this, which is not like super extensive, but there seems to be two camps of the I don't think ancestral is the right word. The like nourishing food communities. Okay, like make a broader
I like
bubble.
That, I like that.
The nourishing food community, right? The real food community. There's like two camps, right? There's the one camp that says, as long as you're eating whole grains that are freshly milled, so they're milled and then used within a day tops, really, maybe 2 days if you're stretching it. And then there's the crowd that says all grains. We're not going to go. Let's like stick with grains, not go down another rabbit trail of like legumes and all these things, but like just grains for this conversation. So the second group says all grains need to be soaked, soured, or fermented, sprouted to lessen the anti-nutrients in it. I am curious. I think I know what your answer is, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on those two different camps.
Wait, and caveat, can you also add phytic acid in there? Talk about phytic acid,
well,
please.
I think, okay, wait. Don't talk about phytic acid yet, because I think I want to introduce that with a little bit more context.
Perfect. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Then. Put that in the background.
Let me start with a very quick story. First, a little side offshoot. We're desperate. Christina and I do not have titles. We don't know what our titles are. We don't know what we are. Like, we have no idea what we are. And we're trying to figure out if she's CEO, I'm this, anyhow, I think I found the right one. I don't know if it's fitting or not, but I like culinary storyteller. Telling stories,
I love that.
Connecting. I like that one. So let me tell you a very quick story, but it'll help answer this. So when we lived in Ireland years ago, I don't know if I told you the story about the TV piece I did for What Are You Eating, the show there. Okay, so we had been there a few months, and I got a phone call from RT. That's kind of their national television network. And they said, hey, we want you to be on this episode of this television show called What Are You Eating? It's going into its third season, and we're figuring out the different episodes for the series this year. I'm like, sure, absolutely. What's the episode about? And he said, veganism. And I'm like,
stop.
Veganism? I don't think I'm the right person for this. Why would you want me? He's like, no. This is what we're going to do. We're going to take the host. It was this really cool host for the show. And there was a huge vegan movement at the time in Ireland. There still is now, but it was bigger then. And he said, what's going to happen is he's going to get all his blood work done. And then he's going to go on a completely vegan diet for a month. And during that month, he's going to go around Ireland, interview a lot of the leaders who's leading the vegan movement. And at the end of the month, he's going to get his blood work done. And then we want to bring you on, and we want you to work us through the prehistory of the introduction of meat into our diets as humans, and maybe butcher a few things and stone tools and all this. I said, oh, I can do that. That's okay, great. So a couple months later, we go to this beautiful place in the Wicklow Mountains called Powers Court Waterfall. I mean, it looked like a postcard. There's waterfall coming out of the mountain. Everything's green. It's Ireland. There was a stream running, and I was teaching at University College Dublin at the time. So we brought 3 of my graduate students out and a whole bunch of rock, and we made some stone tools, and we brought 2 deer, 2 rabbits, and 2 ducks, and had them there. So I'm walking the host through the prehistory of stone tools, and when meat came in, and when we started hunting and all these things. Meanwhile, the students are in the background, and they're butchering deer with these stone tools, and it was wonderful. And then the host said, listen, pick up that duck, and then grab one of those stone tools, and I want you to cut the duck open, and then like pull everything out of the inside. And I'm like on TV? He's like, yeah, it's Ireland. We'll show anything. I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means, but sure. So I picked up this duck and I grabbed a flake from the flint we were using and I cut open the inside and I reached all the way inside. I promise this is related to your question. I reached all the way up up to the throat, grabbed it, pulled everything out, and it was all like literally all the innards were sitting. It looked like a biology textbook on my arm. And at that moment, I had one of these weird light bulb realizations, and it was really hard because I had a host standing there. I had the guy with the boom pole with the mic in my face. There was a drone flying. We had two camera guys. I had students with razor sharp stone tools about to cut themselves, and I'm trying to not sound stupid, and I had this light bulb moment. This is what I realized. A duck is a granivorous bird. A duck is perfectly designed to consume grains, literally right off the stalk. That's how to eat them. And this duck, the day before it was killed, had gorged itself on barley. So it's there, and this is what this is how granivorous birds consume grains. First off, they grab the grains, and they're designed to do this. The first part of their anatomy that the grains go into is something in most animals is called a crop. In a duck, it's something a little bit different, but it's the same thing. It's an enlarged pouch in the esophagus, and these grains go into this pouch and they sit there between 12 and 16 hours, and it's sitting at body temperature. It's moist and it's dark for 12 to 16 hours. Mm-hmm. During that time, they soak, they ferment, and they sometimes even sprout. And only then do these softened, detoxified grains go down to the next part of their anatomy, which is the gizzard. And the gizzard are these, you know what a gizzard is, but these two muscular discs. They eat the rocks that sit between the discs, and they literally stone grind these processed grains. And then the grains go into the rest of their digestive tract, which at that point operates very similar to ours, right, for all intents and purposes. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, oh my God, other than baking, they're making sourdough bread. They're literally making stone ground, detoxified grains in their digestive tract. And then I thought to myself, I wonder what would happen if I was able to take a grain and all this is happening with the mic. And I'm like, so if you took the grain and bypass the crop in the gizzard and put it into their digestive tract, that works like ours. Because essentially that's how most of us eat grains at that point. We don't go through any of that other process. And then I'm like, let me get back to reality here. I'll never know that. Well, I found out that answer a few years later. I was reading an article, I think it was in the New York Times, but it was about a disease that ducks and geese get in city parks called angel wing disease. And the angel wing disease happens when you have the really nice, well-meaning old people from the retirement home, and they're giving the bread to the Wonder Bread or whatever to the ducks and the geese, and they get malnourished, and they end up getting parts of their body deformed as a result of these grains. Now, how weird is it? How strange is it that here are these well-meaning, nice old people sitting on the park bench feeding the ducks essentially exactly what they're designed to eat. Like, they're feeding them grains. We just made it into bread. But what happens is they get malnourished because that grain is already in a state where it can't go through that natural process. It's too late for it. It's already been ground up. It's already been cooked. It can't ferment. It can't do the things that it needs to. It can't soak. It's already in the state of that bread. So here they're eating the final product of this. They're not allowing the crop especially to do its work, and they're sick as a result of it. Well, that's exactly what's happening to us as well. I do not, and I don't want to discount any. I didn't hear what your other guest had said, so I'm really hesitant to speak about exactly what that guest said. Because I really don't want to be in that position. But I would suggest that there is no place in the human diet for grains, nuts, seeds, and legumes that haven't been through a process to at minimum detoxify it to its maximum potential. And on top of that, to then process it in a way that will allow the nutrients that are in it actually to become accessible and available to our bodies.
So as part of the thing, though, devil's advocate here, part of the thing with the ducks, would it potentially be, though, that they're eating like a white bread that has had all of the nutrients from the grains removed, too?
Potentially,
and with
yes.
glyphosate on it.
Yes. Well, yeah, that too. And all the other additives that are in Wonder Bread.
I don't know what bread they're feeding it. But here, this is another kind of wrinkle into all this as well. When we first opened when we brought the sourdough bakery that was out of our house into the place where it is now, The very first week we were open, we had, and this is really interesting, 3 women come in that were all visibly and verbally upset with what we offered or didn't offer as far as bread's concerned. This is what happened, and I'm serious, 3 in the same week. It almost sounds like it's planned. The first woman comes in. We're so excited to be open, so excited to get any sort of feedback from our customers. And the first one comes in, and she's like, "Do you have any 100% whole grain sourdough bread?" And I said, "No." I said, "We all of our sourdough breads, at least at this time, are a mixture of whole grains and bread in white flour as well." And she was super upset. "How do you call yourself a place that's focused on health and you don't have any 100% whole grain sourdough bread?" And she left, she was threw up her arms and left. A day or two later, another woman came in and asked the same question. This one, at least, I talked to her for a little while, and she's like, "Well, yeah, but if it's not 100% whole grain, it doesn't have all the nutrition that I'm looking for." And she left without buying anything as well. I'm like, wow. Now we do some 100% rye, whole grain rye, and some other breads for certain events and for holidays and things, but we didn't at the time it was all a mixture. The third woman who came in that was upset came in, literally it was the next day, and she said, "Do you have any 100% white flour sourdough bread?" And I said, "No, all of it's a mixture of this." And she was just as upset as the first two. She said, "I can't believe you call you about health and all this." Well, every single one of them was right. They all had a point. The first two were looking for the most amount of nutrition they could possibly get from the grain. And almost all of the nutrition you can get from that grain comes from the germ. You get some fiber from the bran, you get some, bunch of starch from the endosperm, but you get it from the germ. If it's not a 100%, or if it's not a whole grain, you're lacking in some of the potential nutrition you can get from it. So they had a point, and what they were looking for was the most amount of nutrition. The third one, who I talked to the longest, has horrendous reaction to grains from the phytates and the lectins and most of the other issues that grains have. And most of those toxins are on the outside of the grain, or in the bran and in the germ. So with the nutrition also comes the problem. So she was trying to eat bread with the least amount of reaction. And so if your sole goal in life with bread is to eat bread without having any sort of negative reactions in the safest way possible, it is, I mean this, and people would probably attack me for this, but it's true, 100% white flour sourdough bread would be your gold standard if that's what you're looking for. It would have the least amount of toxins, and what toxins would be there have been detoxified to the maximum place. Now, on the other hand, if what you're looking for is the most amount of nutrition possible and you do a great job, your body doesn't reject gluten or some of the other issues with grains, what you would look for is 100% whole grain. But they're looking for two completely different things.
Wow. That seriously just blew my mind. It never even occurred to me. The vast difference between those two, and how somebody, like you said, it's all a matter of what you're looking for.
Right. And where you are in your journey and your health.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So, but it sounds like no matter what, you recommend freshly milled.
Yeah. So, okay. The gold standard, to me, if you're somebody who can eat bread at all and you're looking for nutrition, you're looking for sort of the best of everything you could possibly have. This is one day we'll be here. We're not there yet. The gold standard to me would be freshly milled sprouted grains that have been through a true fermentation process. That would be literally the gold standard. But I would rather have, and this is where I think different bakers and different people would start to disagree. I would rather have non-freshly milled grains that have been through a sourdough process than freshly milled grains that have not been through that process. Again, there is that grain. There's nothing about that grain that is designed for our bodies. We are literally trying to intercept part of the reproductive process of another species and safely and efficiently derive nutrition and pleasure from that grain. And it is impossible to do unless you put it through some sort of a process like sprouting or soaking or fermenting. But again, I'm not downplaying. I am not downplaying at all the benefits of freshly milled grains in any way. But freshly milled sourdough grains would be the gold standard. But if you had to just choose one, it would be the true sourdough, at least in my mind, the sourdough.
Sorry, my mic was on.
No,
mute.
are you going to ask about phytic acid now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So along this same conversation, there's two camps, and supposedly there's research out there supporting that phytic acid is seen as an antioxidant and is actually good for the body. That's one camp. And then the other is
because
that
it helps to remove toxins from the body.
Yes. Thank you for finishing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
and
the
then the
thought
other
process on
camp
it.
is that phytic acid is an anti-nutrient and bad for the body. And according to both camps, there's research supporting both.
And there is research supporting both because they're both right. And I think that's part of the issue. We love these black and white answers, but they don't exist. So first off,
thank you for saying that.
I know.
I feel like
we have to pause and acknowledge that. Thank you, Bill, for coming on here and exposing the truth for us, because you're right. We just want that quick answer that's like, okay, good. Bill said it. Now we can go and do it. But it's so much more nuanced. So go ahead. Tell us.
It is majorly nuanced. We have to remember this. Not only are we trying now to do exactly what I said, intercept part of this other process that's heavily guarded through toxins in order to be successful and safely and efficiently get nutrition from it. And somebody say, oh, well, we've been eating bread. Bill said we've been eating bread for 8,600 years. What's the issue? Well, look, we weren't eating a roll and 2 slices of bread every single day 8,600 years ago. We were eating a little bit of bread because remember, the true cost of producing that loaf of bread is masked from us today. And in the past, you would have never had that much bread. It literally wouldn't be physically possible to eat as much bread in the past in any form compared to what we're eating today. So we have this sort of compounded issue. First, we're trying to do something that's a little bit strange, is to get nutrition from a grain safely and efficiently. And the other is to do it at the scale that most of us are trying to do it in our homes, right? But at the same time, and that presents a problem, scaling it to that point. A little bit of something that at a low level might act as an antioxidant, but at a higher level can cause massive issues because it's binding with calcium and magnesium and is a true anti-nutrient. They're two completely different things because of the scale. But at the same time, it isn't a time for us to shut down and say, oh my gosh, this conversation has just got way too technical. It's too convoluted. I don't know who to listen to, so I'm just going to shut down. That's the last time or last reason to shut down, because for most of us, bread should be the most important. For anybody who's a mother or a father, bread potentially could be the most important thing you can pay attention to, because your kids are eating probably at least 2 slices a day. And if you can for nothing else, give them the healthiest version of that for the next every single day, every single week, every single month, every single year that they're in school, you have made a transformation in their health compared to what it would be if you just said, this is the end of this conversation, I'm not dealing with it anymore, I'm just going to serve the Petridge Farm and call it a day. So so it is both, but it does, so it's there for a reason, right? If it's there for 2 primary reasons to support that grain. Number one, the fact that it's an anti-nutrient, and more importantly, the fact that it is or anti-nutrient and also an antioxidant, it regulates how minerals move in and out of that grain, and also the toxin load of that grain for things like heavy metals and other sorts of things. So it serves a purpose there. The most important thing that it does, though, is when it's ready to sprout, there's an enzyme that's created or released. It's a phytase enzyme that takes the phytic acid and turns it into phosphorus, which helps nourish that grain as it creates new life and as it sprouts and becomes a plant. So it's there for a number of different reasons. It's there as a toxin. It's there to help regulate, and it's there to protect, and it's also there to help nourish that grain when it's been deactivated. So, but the problem is we don't create that phytase enzyme. We don't have the ability to turn off a lot of those issues on our own. We have to rely on other natural processes, things like fermentation, in order to do it. It's the same with the lectins. The only thing that, as far as I'm concerned, the only major safety issue with grains that aren't either negated or at least dealt with to a high extent through the fermentation process are the oxalates that are there, because there's not much that'll touch them, which isn't as big of an issue with grains as it is with things like certain nuts and the like, but it is something to pay attention to.
Okay. Thank you for going into that.
Yeah.
I know this is a big conversation. I think the whole paleo movement, like, of the past 15 years or whatever, really got people looking at bread, which is good. And grains in general is really good. But then I think it got like almost more confusing. And I think that, this conversation today has been really helpful to kind of sort through all of that. So, okay.
Can I say one other very quick? I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to just, it is confusing. Now, first off, please, for somebody who's listening to this and you're like, okay, this is a little bit too much information right now. I don't know what to do. The very first thing I would do is at least say, okay, let me get some genuine sourdough and just maybe sit on that, use that for a little while until some of these other nuances maybe you understand and can sort of sort through. I can promise you that if you get some genuine sourdough, most of what we've already talked about has been dealt with and is the safest and most nourishing option. And then you can sort through the rest of it. But at least if you want to default to that, that's good. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is that it sounds confusing. It sounds exhausting. And it is. I mean, we are so far removed from a true, genuine connection to our food, where it comes from and how it's prepared. Most of what is fed to us is, information-wise, is completely erroneous, full of lies, because other people are trying to make money in the back of our health. We don't know who to listen to. I get it. But what's cool and amazing is that there's podcasts like this one where people are diving in. You guys are making no more or less money on what I say or your next guest says. It doesn't matter. All you're trying to do is, inspire other people and inform other people to make decisions for themselves. And that's exactly what people should be listening to. I'm so thankful that we have, now there's a lot of issues with the internet, there's a lot of issues with social media, there's a lot of issues with a lot of these things, but we have more access to information now than we have ever had. And a lot of it is terrible, but a lot of it is amazing. And we have that opportunity. It is a blessing to be in a place where we can start to re-engage and reconnect and reinform ourselves. But the reality is it is nuanced. There's nothing that's black and white. And here's just a very, very quick example. Every single plant on this planet has toxins. It does, period. Some of them will kill us. Some of them will make us sick over time. Some of us
I was not crazy.
No, neither was your 8-year-old. But a lot of it has to do with context and dosage and all of these things. So, for example, cinnamon. The flavor of cinnamon is there. The cinnamon is the bark of a tree. The flavor of cinnamon is there as an insecticide and a fungicide to keep insects and fungus off of the tree so the tree will live. Now, at very small doses, we love cinnamon. In high doses, it can land us in the hospital, right? So, something can be a spice to a medicine. The same exact thing can be a spice, a medicine, and a poison, depending on how much of it we have, what context we have it in, what we have it with at the same time. And it's not, this is good for us, this is bad for us. It's like the 3 women that came in asking for either whole grain or white bread. What is it that you are trying to accomplish with your diet right now? And, what are the best choices for you? That's the only way you can even make things black and white. But then when you accomplish that, some of that's going to change.
Yeah. I went from doing sourdough, like I started off with making sourdough with like bread flour, which I couldn't even really find that was an organic bread flour. But I was like, I'm going to learn how to do this, and I'm going to learn how to do it the easiest way that I can figure it out, right? Because that was that when I started making sourdough was like before the sourdough boom of COVID. So it was just whatever, I could find on the internet to learn from. So I like mastered that. And it took me a while before I felt comfortable to add in a whole grain. And it was like a whole grain flour and I made it, I don't remember what the ratio was, but it was like 70-30 or something, whole grain to bread flour. And then a few years later, then I finally was like, I'm going to buy a grain mill and start trying to do this, use a grain mill to mill grain. And even then I was like, I can still only make a good loaf of bread with like a 70-30 situation. And then I finally have now, 7 years into making sourdough, have started to make whole grain sourdough with freshly milled grains. And it's only because it took me that long to kind of like figure it out and experiment and learn how to do it one way and then start to add in something else. So all that to say, and even before I started making it, I was buying it at the grocery store or from a local sourdough baker. And so it's this whole long process. It's taken me 7-8 years to get to the point that I'm at now. And I'm sure, within the next 7 or 8 years, I'm going to learn something else and incorporate something else. Like, I don't ever want somebody to listen to our show and be like, okay, well, Corey makes sourdough from, freshly milled whole grain wheat that she sources from the farm next door or grows by herself. Like, harvests from the ducks that her husband shoots in their backyard. Like the
That is a goal of mine. That's funny you say that. I want to make bread out. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. But like, I don't want people to listen to our show and go, well, Corey is there, I need to be there too. I want you to listen to our show and go, I'm here. Yesterday I brought Wonder Bread. Maybe next week I'll buy sourdough, and then the next year I'll consider trying to make it with conventional flour or, whatever, like just take whatever step you can logically take and that actually feels doable to you. Like don't leap from point A to point B, like take it slowly, incrementally bigger steps so that it's doable and sustainable in your life.
I would argue that every single loaf that you made for the past 7 years, no matter where you were on your journey, was better than just about anything you could buy anywhere.
Yeah. So because I'm realizing now, oh no, we're getting short on time and I still want to make sure that we cover like three main things. But if we have a listener who is at the beginning of their journey and they are at the grocery store and they're just feeling so overwhelmed by all of the bread options, what is your recommendation for what are some things that they can look for?
Okay, thank you, because that's a great question. First off, do not trust the label sourdough. It is absolutely meaningless. There's no regulation behind it whatsoever, no requirements behind it whatsoever. Unfortunately, what the modern industrial food system has done with sourdough is played on the misperception of the general, consumer that sourdough is supposed to taste sour. So most people's expectation, if they've never had sourdough, if they've only had terrible sourdough, is that it should taste sour. So what they've done is give the customer exactly what they're looking for. They take a regular yeasted bread and add something that's sour to it to make it taste sour, and then they slap a label on it called sourdough. They put it in a brown package instead of the clear package and a higher price, and then you think you're getting sourdough. So first of all, the only things that you need for bread is flour, water, salt, and then your community of wild bacteria and yeast. That's all that you need for the most amazing sourdough in the world. So if you turn over the label and it says anything other than flour, water, salt, it immediately would start to become suspect to me. Now, first off, the true flavor in bread, real sourdough bread, comes from that bacterial fermentation. So, certainly we can add other things to sourdough. We don't need to, but you could. But the presence of a whole lot of things, it's kind of like when you buy cheese and it's got like the habanero peppers and all these other things in it. Well, there's no reason to put habanero peppers in good cheese. You do that because you're masking tasteless or terrible cheese. So if there's a ton of ingredients in there, it starts to become suspect. But if it says yeast, it would become suspect to me as well. Again, you can have sourdough where somebody's added a little bit of yeast to it. It's not traditional. It's not what we make here, but it could be. If it says yeast, it probably isn't sourdough. But what the kind of the telltale sign is if it says anything sour on it, lactic acid, citric acid, or acetic acid, or vinegar, which is acetic acid. If it says any one of those, then I would turn it over and put it right back because it's not sourdough. They're making a regular yeasted bread and making it taste a certain way to fool you, to make you think that it's sourdough.
Okay. That's helpful. Now moving on to the next question is, we talked about pH of grains before. So I want to make sure that we don't forget to talk about the pH of grains. And then I also want to make sure that we don't forget to talk about the difference between kamut and einkorn grains.
Okay. So let's talk about the pH first. We bake with a pH meter all the time. Like, we do our sourdough baking with a pH meter. And truly, most of what we do downstairs is play with pH because we're using, all fermentation makes your ingredients like go in one direction or another, depending on what type of fermentation it is, either becoming more alkaline or in most cases more acidic. So remember, with sourdough, we are dealing with two simultaneous fermentation. One that is driven by the yeast eating the available sugars, creating carbon dioxide and alcohol, and the other driven by the bacteria that are eating available sugars, producing lactic acid and all the other wonderful things, the chemical and physical changes that make sourdough bread what it is from a safety and nourishment perspective. You track the yeast fermentation by literally the bubbles. Is it rising? Is it getting bigger? Those are the ways you can visually give a check to whether or not, where the yeast fermentation is in the process. The bacterial fermentation, a great way to check it is with a pH meter. Now, I'm not suggesting everybody goes out and buys a pH meter. I will tell you, your sourdough baking will transform if you do, and you can get them for like $30 off of Amazon. Hold on, let me just get the one we have.
I'm going to need one of these.
I was about to say, I want the link. He needs to give us the link to this.
We'll get the link and we'll share it in the show notes.
Yeah.
There's a ton of different kinds. There's one that's from, I'll send you the link. There's one that's about $110 that's specifically designed for bread. I think it's from Hansen Instruments, and it's good. But this one is Yinmik. It's about $30 online. What you want to look for is that it has a tip like that, a probe. You can use it for cheese. You can use it for fermented vegetables, and you can absolutely use it for bread. Why that's so important is the yeast, again, is only in sourdough baking. The only thing the yeast is doing that's important is making it rise. And yes, that's important. But for anybody listening to you two, they're probably more interested in the bread also being healthy and safe than they are about how it actually looks. And that only comes from the bacteria. You need to make sure that the pH at some point in the process drops to at least below 4.6 in order, in my mind, to call it sourdough. Now, our bread, hold on, I'm looking, because we have all of our bakers were in I have my phone out for a second. We're in a group chat, certainly, and let's see, the bread that went in yesterday, the pH was 3.5.
At what point are you checking this pH level in the process of baking bread? It
depends. If it's bread, I would check it. Well, it's really good if you have the time and you're sort of fine nerding out on this stuff. It's great to check it in a lot of different places so you can keep track of it, because that's the way you're going to know what you should change. Should it be warmer? Should it have a shorter bulk fermentation time? All these things. So it would be great if you at least checked it right after it came out of the mixer, at the end of the bulk fermentation, and then when it goes into the oven. But at least for the health purposes, I would want to make sure that it got below 4.6 before it went into the oven. So if you're going to check it once, check it right before it goes into the oven. Okay. Remember, one of the things that it's tracking is that because the grains are at neutral 7, the grains are like in the high 6s, right? So by getting it down to at least 4.6, it meant that you absolutely had a sufficient amount of bacterial fermentation, time and environment to detoxify the grains, transform the gluten, and do all the things, wonderful things that it does. You do those things. But in addition, when you get below 4.6, like I mentioned earlier, there's an enzyme that's activated that cuts the gluten strands and starts chopping them up and making them more digestible. So it's very important that you get below that in order to do it. Here's the danger, though. Now, there's a lot of people that'll say, hey, I have this incredible sourdough because it's fermented for 3 days. And it's the best sourdough you can possibly have because it goes, some fermentation is good, more must be better. Well, it's not true 100% because I can promise you that if you get below 4.6, especially if you get below 4 and keep it down there for too long, your gluten, it may be the healthiest it could possibly be, but it's not going to make a loaf of bread. Like it's impossible. It will not hold together. The gluten is literally destroyed. So you just have this. Yeah. The only way that that's possible, and this is going to get technical for like 2 minutes, but for the people that are at the place to get this, please. When you put dough into the fridge, you slow down the yeast activity, but you shut down the bacterial activity. It's done. So,
okay. So wait, I'm guilty of this.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know. Okay. Keep going. So
if you have a recipe, and I've seen them, and there's a lot of them. Most of them are like this. Let's not talk about bread for a second. Let's say, okay, a cookie recipe or whatever recipe. Mix everything up, put your sourdough mother, add your flour, do this, and then put it in the fridge to ferment overnight, and then stick it in the oven the next day. It's not sourdough. You have shut down the bacteria. They're not doing it.
Whoa. The cookie recipe that says put it in the fridge overnight?
It's not sourdough. Check the pH. Check the pH beforehand. Check the pH after. It hasn't changed. But
okay, so just leave it on the.
Christine and I's chins are on the floor.
Yeah, totally.
Typically with our cookies, we ferment. But the good news is, if you keep most things, now a lot of it depends on how active your mother is. It depends on how much liquid is in the recipe. Things that are wetter ferment faster. Things that are warmer ferment faster. Usually, especially with bread, if you keep it on the counter at room temperature for 3 hours or so, you're typically getting to the pH you need for most things. Okay.
So if we're making cookies, it doesn't have to go 24 hours.
Yeah, in the fridge, like the recipe says.
No, putting sourdough cookies in the fridge for 24 hours doesn't do anything other than make them cold. Because it literally shuts down. Now there is from a cookie baking perspective, in most cases, it's better to cook a cold cookie because of the way that it spreads out and all this. So what we do
for the butter, right?
Yeah, we ferment it for at least 3 hours or longer, depending on the recipe. We still put it in the fridge to get them cold. Has nothing to do with the fermentation, and then put it back in. So if here's applicable to bread though. If you're making bread, and I had this wrong in my book, and I can't wait to do a new edition. Because what I was trying to do was make things accessible to people, and I didn't understand this when I wrote the book. One of the things that I said was, okay, here's a great way to do the sourdough all the way through to the end, and great. But if you are really busy, you could, and you could essentially get up in the morning, or night before, refresh the mother. Get up in the morning and mix everything together, and then stick it back in the fridge and go to work. And then come back from work and pull it out, divide it and pre-shape it and shape it, and stick it back in the fridge. And the next morning, stick it in the oven. And what you've done is you've slowed down that yeast activity to work around your own schedule, and you can bake the loaf of bread, and it comes out looking like a gorgeous loaf of sourdough bread. The problem is it is a gorgeous loaf of yeasted bread. It is not a gorgeous loaf of sourdough bread. The bacteria haven't had a chance to do its work. You've slowed down the bacteria. You've slowed down the yeast, you've shut down the bacteria. So what you could do is sort of a compromise. If you mix it, autolyse it, bulk ferment it, divide it and pre-shape it and shape it, getting into its baskets, and then retard it overnight in the fridge and bake it the next day, you're golden. You've reached, because of that long bulk, 3.5 hour bulk fermentation, the time on the counter with the shaping, pre-shaping, you've absolutely, in almost every case, reached the 4.6 or below that you need. And then, slowed it down. And you're not going to get to the 3.5 that we baked it at, but you're going to be in a very safe, amazing place, and your bread's going to be fine. And I would call it sourdough. But if it's never seen for more than a couple minutes room temperature, it hasn't done it. Now, this is very important because if I kept it at room temperature for longer, if our dough was sitting for room temperature for 3 days, that not only would the yeast not be active anymore, the pH, there's no gluten left. Like the gluten is completely destroyed and it wouldn't hold together. It wouldn't form
because the bacteria has eaten it all up completely, right?
The bacteria has not only done all the fermentation, but that enzyme has gone bananas and cut the gluten strands up like this. And then all of a sudden you're left with a pile of mush. It's not going to do it. So I'd be very wary of the people saying, I have this, 42-hour fermented sourdough bread. The only way they're doing that is by keeping it in the refrigerator for the entire time, slowing down the yeast and shutting down the bacteria. It has no health benefits over a sourdough bread that's made in an entire day. In fact,
so interesting.
If you're keeping it in there the whole time, it may not even have reached that pH.
So usually what I do when I make sourdough, and I would call it like a 72-hour fermented sourdough, is that I would make it like I'd stir together the starter and the flour and everything in the morning, and then throughout the day I'm doing stretch and folds, and then by the time we get to like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then I'm shaping it and putting it into my basket, and then I'm putting it in the fridge, and then I bake it 2-3 days later. But from what you're saying, like, by the time I get to the end of the day at 4 o'clock or whatever, if I've started it at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning and I've gotten 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I could basically just bake it then and it wouldn't make any difference.
You're getting no health benefits with it in the fridge. Now, there may be a benefit that it works around your schedule better to put it in the fridge and do it. But that time spent in the fridge is doing nothing other than making it convenient for you to do it. But you have, with your schedule, you have absolutely reached the pH that you need. But that additional time in the fridge is doing nothing from a health perspective.
So the fridge is essentially stalling the bacteria, or the bacteria, it likes a warmer environment, so it's not working in the same way that the yeast is slowing down, right? Is that why the bacteria is not working when you put it in the fridge?
Yeah, it's too cold for the bacteria. Right. It stops. The yeast slow down. Okay. But the bacteria stops. So why this is important is because, first off, if it never sees enough time, it's not getting down to that pH. Be wary of people saying they have a 3 or 4 day sourdough because it's meaningless. And would actually raise some flags for me to make sure some part of that process has been sitting at room temperature long enough. But the other thing is even more importantly, because if you Google a sourdough recipe right now, most things that would come back are probably good. I mean, sourdough recipes that you would buy a book for, a cookbook for, or that get off the internet are pretty good. They're reaching what they need to reach pH-wise. But almost every single other sourdough recipe does not, because you're mixing things together. You're slapping a little bit of sourdough mother into something. It's like most of the sourdough cookie recipes are like they took a Nestle Toll House cookie recipe, added some sourdough mother, mixed them up, and then baked them, and then you still have 2 cups of flour that have never been through the fermentation process.
And a ton of sugar.
And you want a ton of sugar too. But it is just because you've added the sourdough mother doesn't make it sourdough. Just because you've added the sourdough mother and stuck it in the fridge doesn't make it sourdough. You have to make sure the bacteria have the opportunity and the environment to do the important work that it has to do. And one way to check that is actually with the pH meter. Again, not that everybody needs to do that, but it is something that would help.
Yeah, but like if you want to geek out about it, buy that $30 pH. I'm buying one. Send me the link.
Just remember this. Remember this, please. There are when you make sourdough properly, there are 2 fermentations happening at the same time, and they're the yeast and the bacteria, and they're evaluated separately because they are separate, right? They deal in different temperature thresholds and all these other sorts of things, just like I mentioned. The pH of the bread or the dough says nothing about the yeast. And the size of the mother is no indication of the bacteria. So it's nice, you visually can see the yeast working, and a pH meter certainly helps with that. Let me just say one other thing that's really important. I'm going to grab a prop. Hold on.
Guys, we are going to quiz you on this at the end of the episode, the difference between yeast and bacteria. So make sure you're paying attention.
All right. So you said something earlier about the mother and the hooch and the whole thing. So when you do sourdough properly, So there's a point to this. When you make sourdough properly, you have this community of bacteria, community of yeast that are working side by side, doing the things that they're supposed to do. When you put them in the refrigerator, the bacteria shut down and the yeast slow down. So the yeast continues to have babies, but slowly. The bacteria do not. So the mother that you put in the refrigerator today is a different thing when you pull it out a month later. Right, the populations of bacteria and yeast have shifted because the bacteria have gotten no stronger and no bigger. The yeast have done it slowly, but the proportion of yeast to bacteria is now different than it was when you put it in. That's one reason why you want to, if it's been in the refrigerator for a long period of time, you want to refresh it several times to sort of re-engage that balance. Now, if it's sat in your refrigerator for weeks and sometimes months, what you get is the hooch on the top. Now, the hooch is a combination of two things. The hooch is the alcohol. Remember, that yeast is still working in the fridge, so it's continuing to produce the alcohol, and you get that layer of alcohol on the top. The hooch is nasty. The only reason you should produce hooch is if you're in prison and you want to trade it for cigarettes. Like, literally, it's a horrible, horrible thing. But,
I saw an Instagram video of somebody drinking it, and I was like, horrible. Oh no.
But it is also incredibly sour, not in a pleasant way. And the reason it's sour, not in a pleasant way, is because if it's sat in there long enough, there's a third fermentation that you don't want in your sourdough bread. And it's caused by an acetobator bacteria that eats the alcohol and produces vinegar. Right? So the hooch is actually vinegar and alcohol nastiness on the top. And it's because the acetobator bacteria is actually turning that alcohol into vinegar on the top. There are some Instagram posts and some things on Google that say, hey, if you pull out your sourdough mother, you have hooch on the top, stir it in and just keep going. Do not stir it in. Always pour it off. In fact, I even try to dig underneath to grab some fresh stuff underneath.
Yeah.
But like Corey, what you mentioned earlier, like you've brought it back. I have never in my life not been able to bring back a mother, even if I've neglected it for months and months. It's easier to bring back an old mother covered in hooch than it is to start a new one from scratch.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had 2 babies since starting my starter, and we've moved, states and states away. And there's just been, times in my life where sourdough was not happening. And it's always, I've always been able to bring it back, but it is always, takes a little bit more time to kind of wake it up, refeed it and get it to be happy again. Okay, wait, did you want to talk about kamut and einkorn?
Oh, real quick.
Yeah. I don't know, Corey, you're on a time crunch.
It's okay.
You're good?
I don't have a lot to say about it anyhow.
Oh, you don't?
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
Then
I will tell you what I do know. They're both fantastic. If I had to choose one from a health and safety perspective, it would be einkorn. Einkorn's a little bit older. The gluten is a little bit different, and it makes a really healthy, nourishing, safer bread. However, it is harder to work with.
It is.
It's harder to work with. So if you were looking for a more ancient grain to make sourdough bread that worked in a similar way and had similar results, it would be kamut. It has a very similar flavor profile. It develops the gluten in very similar ways. And I mean, part of this, and this is where it's not so black and white, I want my kids to have the safest, most nourishing food in any form, bread or otherwise, in their bodies at all times. And I could make the healthiest loaf of einkorn, I'm not picking on einkorn, but the healthiest loaf of sourdough einkorn you could possibly have. But if they're not going to eat it, it doesn't matter.
Oh my gosh, thank you for saying this. This is something that I said when I spoke at the Wise Traditions Conference. Somebody asked me specifically, I'm making food because it was like right before Thanksgiving, and somebody was asking me if I make something for my family for Thanksgiving, shouldn't I be making it the healthiest possible thing I could make, with the einkorn and a freshly milled and fully whole grain and whatever. And I said no. Because it doesn't matter if they're not going to eat it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's a lot of, and I'm learning this. I wish I knew it better in the past. I hope I did okay as a father. there is a lot, because food is so much to us as humans. It's wrapped up in all those things we mentioned earlier. It is a very emotional experience to eat. It's a very emotional experience to get redirected or chastised or in trouble when we eat, and to feel guilt when we eat. I mean, there's a lot of emotional damage that we can easily do as well-meaning parents that far outweigh the occasional non-sourdough bread or refined sugar that make it to the Thanksgiving table or whatever.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I love that you said that.
Okay. Let's go into a rapid fire
Okay,
round.
This is fast.
now I'm scared. Okay, okay.
This is
Yeah,
the end.
yeah, yeah.
This
Okay.
is the end, guys.
We have not given you any heads up on what these questions are, so it's going to be so fun. All right. Rapid fire.
Okay.
Do you think grains belong in a human diet?
Nutritionally, no, but culturally, yes.
Yes. Okay. Christine, you want to do the next one?
Yeah.
We'll just go back and forth.
Yeah. Sourdough. Hobby, lifestyle, or cult?
Lifestyle. That's a great question, though. I love your multiple choice, by the way.
As a professor, that's your favorite?
Yeah.
One ancient food tradition that still blows your mind.
We talked about it earlier, but using insects in cheese production, like Kasumarzu, like the maggots.
Oh, man. Yeah. Okay. What's one myth about sourdough that needs to go?
Oh, nice one. I wish we had more time for this, but I'll tell you one. One is that people with celiac, all people with celiac cannot consume sourdough bread. It is not true.
I do wish we could dive into that.
We have 8 customers that we know of, confirmed medically diagnosed celiac, that are absolutely fine on our bread. Now, we do have some people celiac that are not fine on our bread. It's a spectrum like everything else, but we have 8 confirmed that are fine on our bread, including an 86-year-old woman that eats a slice of our bread every single day.
Amazing. Amazing. Wow. Okay. How would your ancestors react to avocado toast?
Oh, that's a great. I actually, I don't know. I'm between. They'd either be intrigued and try it, or they'd be repulsed. I actually think they might try it. Good question, though.
All right. This is one that you can probably use in the future. If you had to explain ancestral eating at a dinner party in under 10 seconds, what would you say?
It's so unfortunate because I get asked that question all the time and I can't do it.
You got so an hard. Elevator pitch.
Approaching food in a way that allows us to live our best life.
Oh, love that.
But
that's a great answer.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll use that from now on, because I do get. You probably get the same thing.
We do, yeah. I get asked this all the time, and I'm like totally stumbling. Real food?
Isn't that funny? It's like the thing that we talk about the most in our lives, and we're like, I don't know.
Yeah,
it is. It's like one of those words you just can't define, but it means so much. Maybe that's why it's so hard, because to us it's like everything in our life, and we want to convey it in a sentence, and we can't do it.
Yeah.
Huh.
Okay, right, so really you need to write down what you would. Yeah.
I know, seriously.
Okay. Okay, so we're done with all of our questions. Now's the time you get to tell everybody where they can find you, connect with you, get your book, all of that.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you guys. I had a lot of fun. We have so many more things to talk about, so we need to do it again on our podcast. We're going to have you guys on, and I get to shut up and listen to you guys. So you can find us in a number of different ways. We just redid our website. We're super proud of it. Just launched it again 2 weeks ago, and it's modernstoneage.com. That's where you can find everything that we do. It's all under one umbrella now. So our restaurant, the Modern Stone Age Kitchen, is located in Chestertown, Maryland. where, again, we serve familiar food that is made as nourishing as it can possibly be. We also have our nonprofit, the Food Lab, which currently is located above it. So we have all sorts of in-person and virtual classes. So you can come take classes on everything from sourdough to home butchering here. You can find out all of those things online. Our trip to Ireland this summer, all of those things are available, including our new community that we're launching and our blog that we put out every week. If you're interested, and we do put out an email every week that has a blog post and a ton of other information, you can sign up for that on that website as well. You can find us online, Instagram, The Modern Stone Age, and also at The Modern Stone Age and at Dr. Bill Schindler, at Dr. Bill Schindler, our Instagram and Facebook profiles. And the book can be found. If you want a signed copy, first of all, if you want to sign, you already have a copy, bring it when you come visit us, and I'm happy to sign it. If you want us to send you a signed copy, you can order it directly from our website. Just tell us if you want anything particular said on it. Otherwise, you can get it on all the other major places that you can buy books.
And I want to quick plug this. I think that your book is one of the most accessible and like easy to read, enjoyable to read books on ancestral food. So,
and it has recipes at the end too, guys.
Yeah.
100%.
It's one of the books that you should have on your shelf.
That book. Most people don't understand that. We should have pitched it a little bit like a cookbook. I was very inspired by so many things from the Weston Price Foundation, but the book Nourishing Traditions is an amazing book that you can either cook from or sit down and read, or do, obviously do both from. And that's the kind of thing that I was shooting for, but most people realize don't realize there's a lot of recipes. Our entire restaurant that book was a result of learning to cook for my family over 20 years. And that our restaurant was built on the recipes in that book. So it's a great source of information. Thank you so much for the compliment. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to have you sign it next time I see you. I keep meaning to bring it with me, and then I keep forgetting to bring it with me when I know I'm going to see you. So anyway, all right. That is the end of our show. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you learned some things, were challenged on some things, can have some takeaways, had some fun geeking out on pH levels. Go give Bill a follow and buy his book. And you can then follow Christine at Nourish Littles. You can follow me at For Nutrient's Sake. You can follow the podcast at Modern Ancestral Mamas. Those are all on Instagram. And then you can find our show on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, and probably other places where there's podcasts. And please take a moment to review, save, subscribe, blah, 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 all those things. And we really appreciate you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day. All right, you guys, thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.